Let me now show you how we can use the initialization of our data items. So here in this process studio, we have two data items, iterations and index. If I open the iterations data item, I can see that uh, for initialization, we have a checkbox which says reset to initial value whenever this page runs. So so if we what we can do is that if we uncheck this checkbox and though this is the main page, it will run just once. But if we have other pages and on those pages, if we uncheck this checkbox, whenever that page would be called, this value would be reset to its initial value. Otherwise, it will keep on like it will continue with the value what it had when the page had last run. So this is a nice way of like resetting a value for iteration for any data item. So way by which you can use this the setting of values would be like, say you have some global data items uh, and you place those global data items on a single page, and that page does nothing. You simply link your start stage to the end stage. So and you uncheck that checkbox. So this will ensure that the global data items are put back to the initial values simply by running the reset page. Another thing that I want to talk about is the exposure. So by default exposure is set to none, but we have other kind of exposures. Like we can make this exposure as session, this data item as a session data item or an environment data item. So what happens is if we make it as an environment data item, this this will take its value from the environment. So let me create this. Uh, so inside Blue Prism client, if I go to the system manager under processes, I have the environment variables. So right now I have no environment variables. I'll create one. I'll call this uh, iteration environment variable. Its type would be a number and its initial value, let's say I want to keep it as 5000. Click apply. This will save my changes. Now if I go to my process, and instead of using this exposure as none, I want my environment variable. So what I can do is I can select this environment from here, and it's saying there's no environment variable by the name iterations. It's missing and it's not refreshed. So let me refresh it by closing this process studio and opening it again. So if I open this iterations, I will keep this as environment. And from the drop down, I can see that I have you this iterations environment. I cannot type a value into this name field. It's a drop down. It will only show any environment variable that is available to us. So we have one available to us and I can use it. So I can see its type is number and its initial value is 5000. I cannot even edit this thing. So if I try to remove it or edit this, it's not allowing me to do. So it's a read only data item now. Now, what happens with this kind of a data item is that when the process is run from the control room and you go ahead and change the environment variable, you change the value of that environment variable, then the process will not pick up the latest value of the environment variable. Only new processes that are running after the environment variable has been modified will be able to get the modified value. Otherwise, they will not be able to get the new value. So environment variables are kind of read only. Okay, I need to use this thing in my um iterations next. Iterate next. Instead of saying iterations, I need to use iteration environment. Okay, reset, save it. Going to the control room. Let me schedule a session of it. Run this. Now it is running and it will run for 5000 iterations. Even if I go back here and change the environment variable 500, apply, coming to the control room, still it will make 5000 iterations even though I changed its value. However, if I schedule another instance and run this, this should make only 500 iterations. So the second one should complete before the first one. And this is completed because it took 500 iterations. But this one is still running because it is using 5000 iterations. I will now show you the other kind of variables which are session variables. So if I go to my studio, open up my process, and instead of environment variable, I will use a session variable. So let me move it back to iteration. Maybe I'll say iteration session. Click OK. Now it's a session variable, and also let me make its value larger. I don't want it to terminate before I, sorry, complete before I do any changes to it. And also here in my iterate next, I need to use the iteration session using session variable. Going to my control room, and here I will schedule a session, maybe two of these. So I have two sessions scheduled for the same process, and if I run both of them, maybe I'll select both, say start selection. They both are running, but they will have their own values of the session variable. So if we click on this show session variables, then for this one we have this 5000 value. Let's right click, edit value. I will make this maybe 3000, modify. So we can change the values independent of each other. Let me show you that this actually ran for 3000 iterations. Okay, since I changed this to 3000 and it was running at this particular index, it stopped here itself because 3000 is less than this value. And this one should have run for 5000 iterations. So if I open this one, and we saw that it ran to 5000 iterations. If I go one page back and scroll down, I can see it's 4999, and then on the last page it was 5000. So we can see that they can have independent values of each other and they can be modified while the process is running. Now I'm going to show you code stages. So code stage is only available in your business objects. It's not available inside your process studio. So I've already written one business object. Let me open it. In this business object, I have used code stages in these two actions. When you're using code stage, you can configure the language that you're going to work with in the initialize page. In the initialize page, you have this information stage. If I open this information stage by double clicking on it, under code options, we get like the language that we need to work on. We have three different options: Visual Basic, C Sharp, and Visual J Sharp. I am using C Sharp for this demo. On the top, it's showing me the references, the assemblies that I can use in my code stage, and down below I can see the namespaces that I can use. So any external references can also be added over here by clicking the add button and browsing to the assemblies. These assemblies would be accessible to Blue Prism only from the installation path of Blue Prism. If they're outside the installation path, Blue Prism will not be able to get to them. And when you're using these, similarly, you can add more namespaces by clicking add. So they are like your using statements in C Sharp. This will help you to write only the class names without using the namespace names before them. So this is how we configure the the code options inside the information stage of the business object. Uh, so if I click OK on this, then I go here to the local code. So the purpose of code stages, like if you have to do something which is not achievable through any of the other stages in Blue Prism, then you use the code stage and you can write your own code within it. So if I open this code stage, uh, it takes some inputs. So you can add the inputs over here. Right now I have just added one input, which will be a number and its value is 1, and it can return outputs to us. It's not necessary they have to take input or output, but you can add them if you want to get some values into the code stage and out of it, out of the code stage. So it's getting me a number which is stored in the result data item. So I have a result data item. Then here is the actual code which has been written in C sharp. Though when you're writing this code, you will not get IntelliSense. However, if there are any syntax error, you can check it by clicking this check code button. For example, if I remove this semicolon over here and click on check code, it will tell me that there is a compiler error at line 8, a semicolon is expected. So we'll put a semicolon back and this should be compiling fine after this. So what this code stage is doing is, like, we can do anything over here in code stage that C sharp allows us to do. So we have one input which is input number and one output which is result. So if I go to code stage, I can see input number and result as in and out parameters, and these were of type number, but in C sharp they get translated to decimal type. So these are system.decimal. So input number is a value of 1 which we are getting here, and I'm storing this in an integer. So I need to cast it into an integer since this is a decimal type. And y, I have put a hard coded value over here as 2. Input number is 1, y is 2, so x plus y, which is 3, will be stored in the result. Now I'm checking if result is less than 5, which it is. 3 is less than 5, so we are going in a inside the if condition, and we are making it 10. So this result becomes 10. Now, this is just to show you that we can have complex logic over here. So it's not just we have to just use assignments. We can do anything that C sharp allows us. So we are storing this as 10. Then we are calling some function increase by 1 and passing this result to this result is a decimal type. So I need to cast to an integer if this function accepts an integer. So let me show you from where this function is being called. If I cancel out of it, go back to the initialize tab. Here in the custom in this information stage, we have a tab called global code. When I go to the global code, here is the function that I'm calling from my code stage. So global code contains code that can be called by any of my code stage in this business object. So this is the function that we were calling from my code stage, and it takes an integer and it returns an integer. What we are doing in this code is simply incrementing the input parameter by 1 and returning it. So going back to the local code, um, coming back to the code, it takes this value 10, pass it to increase by 1, and it should get back 11 as the result, which is my out parameter. So when I run this, I should get 11 as the output. So when I reset, run, and I get 11 as the output. So this is how we work with code stages. We configure the initialize information stage. We tell like what all are the different assemblies I need, what all are the different namespaces I need, and we also choose the language. That language would be common across all the actions in this business object. And we also saw the code uh, like global code options, which contains the global code over here, and then we call the code stage. So code stage is meant to do anything which the other stages which cannot be achieved through the other stages. Now the code stage is fine, but sometimes you will see that the code that you want to use, it's already written for us and it's already in some assembly, and we don't want to copy everything in that assembly and create a code stage and dump that code into that code stage, because that will cause code duplication, and it's also not easy to maintain. So if we already have an assembly, we can use that assembly through code stage as well. So if I go to initialize here in the information stage under code options, I'm using one as external reference test assembly and using a namespace which is there in that assembly. So let me show you first that assembly. So here's the screenshot of that assembly. What's the code, actual code contained in that assembly? It contains a single like class called my class, which is in this namespace, and this was a namespace that we had imported, and this was the assembly that we had added the reference to. So this assembly contains a class called my class, and it contains a single method called add two numbers, which takes two integers, adds them together, and returns the integer. So going back to our business object here in the external DLL reference, when I open this up, we see it's taking one integer, one number, num1 as the input. It has a value of 25 hard coded into it, and it returns a result as an output, which is again a number. So in the code, we see, okay, here we have the in num1 and out result. Both are of type system.decimal. So here we are initializing my class. So if I come here, we see that my class is being used over here. So we don't have to say external reference test dot my class because this was already added to the namespace. Now on that my class, we are calling this method add two numbers, which was contained in that my class, and it takes two integers. Num1 was decimal, so we are casting it to int, and we have hard coded to this value of 6. So it will take 25 plus 6, and this will return me 31 and store it into result. So let me run this, and I should get 31 from here. Reset, run, and we get 31. So this is how we can use any code which is available to us in an external assembly. We add it to the references and start using it here. Next, I want to talk about the run mode. When we are creating business objects, we have the option to specify the run mode. So I have created some business objects over here. I'll start with exclusive object. So in these business objects, in the under initialize action, we have the information stage. So if I open up this information stage, under information we have the run mode. So this tells like any process that is going to use this business object, what mode will it be in? Will it be in exclusive, background, or foreground? So I've specified this as an exclusive run mode, which means that any process which is using this business object will also be in exclusive mode, and that process cannot run with any other process. If we set at this run mode as foreground, this would mean that any process using this business object would be able to run only if no other process which is in exclusive mode is running. However, other processes that are using background objects would be allowed to run, but two foreground processes cannot run in parallel. And if we use this option as background, that would mean that any process which is using this business object can run with other processes that are either running in background mode or running in foreground mode. And if a process is using multiple business objects with varying run modes, then the precedence of uh, run mode for the process would be exclusive, foreground, background. So if a process is using one exclusive business object but five background business objects, that would make the process as exclusive. So I have a single action in all these three business objects, background, exclusive, and foreground, which are doing the same thing. They are sleeping for 5 seconds. So I have set these three business objects with varying run modes. Similarly, I have created three processes. So if I open up one process over here, they are calling the business object. So this one is using exclusive business object, foreground process is using the foreground business object, and the background process is using the background business object. Now if I go to the control room, I have also published them so I can see them here in my control room. And if I try to schedule two sessions of exclusive process, this should not be allowed because a process in exclusive mode cannot run with other process with exclusive mode. So if I try to schedule one more session, I get an error that this machine is too busy to run that process. So only one process in exclusive mode can be run at a time. I cannot even run a foreground process at this point in time because exclusive will not allow foreground processes to run. So it cannot be run. So let me run this. So it has completed. Now if I try to schedule another session for exclusive process, that will get scheduled. Okay, so this gets scheduled. Let me try one foreground process. So foreground will not work with exclusive. Exclusive will prevent foreground process to be scheduled. So I get the same error. So let me run this. It has completed. What I'll do is this time I will schedule a foreground process. So foreground process is scheduled, but now if I try to schedule an exclusive process, it will be prevented because exclusive cannot run with a foreground process. And we get the same error. However, a background process would be allowed to run. And I can have multiple background processes. So one foreground, but multiple backgrounds are allowed. One exclusive means nothing else will be allowed. Even other processes which are exclusive will also not be allowed. Only a single exclusive process can run. Uh, with a foreground process, it only a one single foreground process can run, but multiple background processes can run. So let me select these three and select run them, and they all get completed. So when we are creating these processes, this is an exclusive process. If I take this background process and also call my exclusive objects over here, then it will become an exclusive process because exclusive has a higher precedence than background. So that's how we use run mode. So this run mode is designed to safeguard our processes getting in the way of each other. When we create business objects, we get two actions created for us by default. So if I open up a business object, I can see here that we get two actions, initialize and cleanup. They appear to be published, but we cannot call these actions from our process studio. These actions actually are empty actions. They're not doing anything. Whatever logic you put in these two actions, they would be executed just once in the life cycle of this business object. Initialize is called before any other actions in this business object is called by Blue Prism, and cleanup is called when this object is about to retire. Just before that, it will call cleanup. So if you see this pictorial diagram, you can see that if we have two actions, say page 3 and page 8, then the process is calling page 3 first, followed by page 8, then it will call initialize before calling page 3, and after it has called page 8 and the process is about to close, before that it will call cleanup. When we are working with applications, sometimes we may need usernames and passwords. We can keep these details in plain text in data items or maybe using password data type. But a better way to store these things is in the credentials within the Blue Prism. Credentials, they provide a more secure and centralized storage option. They are encrypted in Blue Prism database, which makes them accessible only to those who should be able to use them. We can define which process, resource, or roles would have permission to access this information. And we have a special business object called credentials, which will provide actions for using these credentials. So to show you the credentials, I go to the system manager. Under security, we have credentials. And before I create credentials, I need to create the key for it. So I'll generate this key, click generate. I get this key and save to my database. Now I can create credentials. So I'll create a new credential. So I'll call this Ravi credentials. We'll give a username, password. We can set when this password will expire. So I'll set it maybe by 27th Jan. This should expire. And any additional properties can also be stored against this username. So for example, I'll say uh, this is property 1, which will have value 1. Property 2 will have value 2. And amongst access rights, we can choose like which all process would be able to access these credentials, any resources. So I'll say maybe all resources, any particular role. So right now I've just selected resources. I'll click OK on this and have these credentials created. Let me go and create a process that will use these credentials. So I'll create a process, finish, open it, and here to work with credentials we can use the action stage. So I'll use the action, retrieve credentials, business object. It's an internal business object called credentials, and I want to get my credential. So my credential name is Ravi credentials, and I get the output as username, password, expiry date, and status. So I'll retrieve all of them. So I've created 4 data items that will store these outputs. If I click OK, so here are they. And if I link it and run it, I see that I do not have permission to access this credential, Ravi credentials. So I need to provide access to it. So let me save it and go ahead and provide permissions. Over here, we select this, click edit, and under access rights, we have this credentials demo. So I will say that uh, these credentials should be available to this particular process, and which all roles will have access to this credential. So maybe I can create maybe a specific role, or maybe I'll just, for now I will say any role, or maybe if I say only a developer should be able to access, I can select that, or maybe a tester or developer or schedule manager, alert subscriber, administrator, system administrator. For this I'll select all roles. So any role and any resource would be able to access this credential for this by this process only, credentials demo. So I'll click OK, go here, open my credentials demo. If I run this, I should now get my credentials. So I can see I could get the credentials once I gave the permission to it. Similarly, I can also get the properties from this credential. So if I take an action, get properties, get property, credentials name is Ravi credentials, property name is property 1. So I have set these two inputs. Outputs will be property value. Select, create this. OK. If I link this, run it, and I can get the value as well. So that's how we can use credentials. Once we have retrieved, we can then pass them to the application that we are automating and log into it. When working with processes in Blue Prism, at times we may need to create sections in a process or business objects where we would like to allow just a single process to execute that section, like a synchronized section. So for that purpose, we have environment locks in Blue Prism. When we have a stage that is acquiring a lock, then no two processes will be able to acquire the same lock. So only one process would be able to get the lock and would be able to proceed further. Other process would be timing out and throwing an error. So to work with locks, we have a special business object called environment locking available to us. What I'll do is I'll create a process called lock client 1. Open it. We'll use an action to acquire a lock. The business object being used is environment locking. We have acquire lock, query lock, and release lock. So it takes some inputs like the lock that you need to acquire. I'll call this process input file. Timeout. I'll specify as maybe 10 seconds from now. So this will this will have a 10-second timeout. I'll leave this preferred token blank and we can give some comments if required. We get back some output. So it returns me a token. Uh, the token is which is registered against this lock. So we can check for this token. If the lock is not acquired, then this token would be empty. So let's store this. So we are passing these two inputs, collecting this output. Click OK. I will link it. I don't have this lock existing. So if I go to the system manager, here under workflow we have environment locks. Right now I don't see any lock available over here. So let me run this. So there was a problem. I changed the timeout value by removing now from here. Uh, and then when I run it, it acquires the lock. If I go to environment locks, I can see that this lock has been created for me by the name that I specified. The process which acquired this lock is this one, and the lock time was this. Now let me create a similar process. So I'll use file save as. I will call this lock line 2. So I'll open up now lock line 2 and try to run this. It will wait for the 10-second timeout. And after 10 seconds, we should get back an empty token showing that it couldn't acquire a lock. So it ran, but the lock was not acquired. So when a lock is not acquired, maybe we can wait for some time and then try to acquire that lock again before proceeding further to achieve the functionality of allowing a single process to execute a certain section of this process. One thing that we can do is when we are done with the lock is to release it. So in lock client 1, I'll add another action to release the lock. I give this input, then token which is required to be released. So I already captured the token when I acquired the lock, pass that. It doesn't give any output. So let's click OK, link it, reset. When we reset, the lock will automatically get released, which we can verify from our system manager. So the lock has been released. Let me run this. It acquires and then immediately releases. Now if I go to lock line 2, reset, run it, it should also be able to acquire the lock. So the system will automatically release any logs that your process neglects to release in the proper fashion whenever the process stops running. This includes processes running both in Process Studio and the control. We can run these processes from the Process Studio, from the control room, or we can schedule tasks for these processes. Another way to run these processes is through the command line that is outside Blue Prism client. So that will allow us to run these processes from the command prompt or a batch file. So I will like to run this particular process notepad demo from the command line. If I run it manually from the debug toolbar, it opens a notepad and writes this string into the notepad. I will run this from the command line. So reset, close it, and open up the command line. We'll go to the path where Blue Prism has been installed, C drive, program files, Blue Prism Limited, Blue Prism Automate, and we have automate c.exe. C stands for command line, and we'll give a flag of run. I want to run my notepad demo, and credentials which are required to run this is admin user, and the password is also admin. So when I run this, okay, let me publish that. Save it, we clear it, run it again. So you can see the notepad was launched in the background and the text was written within it, and the process finished. You can also look for help by typing this thing, and can see what all different flags it takes and what are the definitions of those flags.